They all stared at my thrift store maternity dress and whispered about my situation behind champagne flutes and miniature quiches. Jessica, my sister-in-law, actually pointed at my worn sneakers and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Oh, Sarah, are those the same shoes you wore to Christmas dinner? Bless your heart, you're really making them last." The entire baby shower fell silent for just a moment before the nervous laughter started. 27 women in designer outfits sitting in the pristine garden pavilion of Riverside Country Club, all watching me like I was some charity case they'd invited out of pity. I stood there clutching my paper plate of finger foods, feeling my cheeks burn with embarrassment. But I didn't cry. I didn't defend myself. I didn't tell them about the Bentley parked 3 blocks away, or the reason I lived so simply. Instead, I just smiled, that same calm smile I'd perfected over months of these gatherings, pulled out my phone, and sent a single text message that would change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah Martinez, and for the past 8 months, I've been living a double life. Not the kind you see in movies with secret affairs or hidden identities, but the kind where you let people believe something about you that isn't entirely true, because it serves a greater purpose. The truth is complicated, messy, and something I've kept locked away from everyone except the people who matter most. But that afternoon at my own baby shower, surrounded by women who thought they knew my story, I realized that sometimes the truth has a way of revealing itself, whether you're ready or not. It started when I married Michael 3 years ago. He came from a family that measured success in zip codes and car payments, where your worth was determined by the square footage of your house and the brand names in your closet. His mother, Linda, had made it clear from our first meeting that she considered me a temporary phase, something Michael would outgrow once he came to his senses. His brother, David, had married Jessica, a woman who collected designer handbags like trophies and spoke about money the way other people discussed the weather, casually and constantly. Family dinners became exercises in endurance, where every conversation somehow circled back to who bought what, who vacationed where, and who could afford which private school for their children. Michael tried to shield me from it at first. He'd squeeze my hand under the table when his mother made pointed comments about our starter apartment, or when Jessica would show off her latest purchase while making sympathetic faces in my direction. But over time, something shifted. The comments became more frequent, more pointed, and I realized that no matter what I said or did, I would always be the girl who wasn't quite good enough for their family. That's when I made a decision that would define the next chapter of my life. I stopped trying to prove myself to them, and instead I let them believe exactly what they wanted to believe about me. The apartment we lived in was modest by anyone's standards. 2 bedrooms in an older complex downtown, with thin walls and neighbors who played music too loud on weekends. I furnished it with pieces from thrift stores and hand-me-downs from friends, not because we couldn't afford better, but because I was saving every penny for something more important. Michael understood, at least in the beginning. He knew about my dreams, my plans, the vision I had for our future that went far beyond impressing his family with material possessions. We ate dinner at a small table I'd painted myself, slept on a mattress we'd bought from a going-out-of-business sale, and learned to find joy in the simple rhythm of building a life together without anyone else's expectations weighing us down. I worked at a small medical practice in a strip mall, serving families who couldn't afford the fancy clinics in the wealthy part of town. The building was nothing special, sandwiched between a nail salon and a tax preparation office, but it was where I felt most like myself. Dr. Patricia Williams, my business partner, had started the practice 15 years earlier with the same vision I carried. We wanted to provide quality healthcare to people who'd been overlooked by the system, who couldn't afford to miss work for appointments at hospitals across town, who needed someone to listen to their concerns without watching the clock. The work was demanding, often thankless, and it certainly didn't pay as much as the positions Jessica would occasionally mention at other practices across the city. But it filled something in me that money never could. Every month, I'd deposit my paycheck and immediately transfer most of it to a separate account that Michael and I had opened together. We called it our Someday Fund, though we both knew that someday was arriving faster than anyone in his family realized. I clipped coupons, shopped sales, and learned to make meals that could stretch across multiple days. To Jessica and Linda, this looked like struggling. They'd exchange glances when I brought generic brand snacks to family gatherings, or when I politely declined invitations to expensive restaurants. They saw sacrifice and assumed it meant we were barely getting by, never considering that maybe, just maybe, we were choosing to live this way for reasons they couldn't understand. The pregnancy changed everything and nothing all at once. When we announced the news at Sunday dinner, Linda's first response wasn't congratulations but concern about whether we could handle the financial burden of a child. Jessica immediately launched into stories about how expensive babies were, rattling off numbers for cribs and car seats and college funds, with the kind of authority that comes from never having to budget for anything in your life. Michael tried to redirect the conversation, but I could see the doubt creeping into his eyes. For the first time since we'd made our pact to live simply, he started questioning whether we were doing the right thing. The baby shower was Jessica's idea, though she presented it as a generous gesture from the family. She insisted on hosting it at the country club, inviting her entire social circle along with the handful of relatives who'd managed to tolerate my presence over the years. I knew it was a setup the moment she suggested it, but Michael was so grateful for what he saw as his family finally accepting our child that I couldn't bring myself to object. She spent weeks planning every detail, from the color-coordinated decorations to the catered menu that cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. Every conversation about the party included subtle reminders about the guest list, the venue, and how important it was that I look presentable for such an occasion. I spent hours trying to decide what to wear, knowing that nothing in my closet would meet Jessica's standards but refusing to spend money I'd earmarked for other purposes on a single outfit. I finally settled on a navy blue maternity dress I'd found at a consignment shop, paired with comfortable flats that had seen better days but would carry me through an afternoon of standing and smiling. When I looked in the mirror that morning, I saw exactly what Jessica's friends would see, a woman who was trying her best but falling short of their expectations. The irony wasn't lost on me that the very image I'd cultivated to protect my real goals was about to be used as ammunition against me. The garden pavilion was everything I'd expected: pristine, elegant, and intimidating. White linens covered round tables decorated with elaborate centerpieces that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Women in designer dresses clustered around the gift table, comparing notes on brands and prices, while servers in crisp uniforms circulated with champagne and appetizers that looked too beautiful to eat. I recognized a few faces from previous family gatherings, but most of the guests were strangers to me, Jessica's friends who'd come to observe the spectacle of Michael's wife's baby shower. From the moment I walked in, I could feel the assessment happening. Eyes scanning my outfit, my shoes, my purse that had been a Christmas gift 3 years ago, and showed every day of wear since then. The conversations didn't stop, but they shifted in that particular way that happens when people want to talk about you while pretending they're not. Jessica greeted me with an air kiss and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, immediately steering me toward a table near the back where I was introduced to her friends as Sarah, Michael's wife, the one I told you about. The games were elaborate affairs designed to showcase Jessica's creativity and organizational skills, rather than celebrate the impending arrival of my child. We played Guess the Baby food flavors with gourmet options I'd never heard of, and estimated the cost of various baby items with price tags that made me grateful for the research I'd already done at discount stores. Every activity seemed designed to highlight the gap between their world and mine, between their casual spending and my careful budgeting. I participated with grace, laughing at the appropriate moments and expressing gratitude for their efforts, but inside I was counting the minutes until I could politely excuse myself and return to the life I'd built away from their judgment. The gift opening was an exercise in performative generosity. Box after box revealed items from high-end baby boutiques, organic everything, and gadgets I'd never heard of but that apparently were essential for modern parenting. Each gift came with a story about why it was the best choice, the safest option, the most recommended by experts who charged consultation fees that exceeded my monthly car payment. I smiled and thanked each giver, making mental notes about which items could be returned for store credit, and which might actually be useful in the practical world of raising a child on a budget. That's when Jessica stood up to make her speech, the moment I'd been dreading since the invitations went out. She tapped her champagne flute with a silver fork and waited for the room to quiet before launching into what she called a few words about our guest of honor. She talked about family, about the importance of supporting each other through life's challenges, and about how proud she was that everyone had come together to help Michael and me during this time when every little bit helps. The phrase hung in the air like a neon sign advertising my presumed poverty, and I watched as heads nodded in understanding and sympathy. But it was what came next that broke something inside me. Jessica, emboldened by the attention and perhaps the champagne, decided to share an anecdote about our family's different approaches to life. She told the room about how I shopped at thrift stores and used coupons, how Michael and I lived in our cozy little apartment and made do with what we had. She painted a picture of noble poverty, of a young couple struggling but making the best of their circumstances, and she did it with the kind of patronizing affection usually reserved for particularly charming pets. The room responded exactly as she'd hoped, murmurs of sympathy mixed with admiration for how resourceful I was, how inspiring it was to see someone make the best of a difficult situation. Someone mentioned how important it was to help families like yours, and another woman nodded knowingly about the challenges facing young people today who hadn't had the advantages of previous generations. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, my smile frozen in place, while a room full of strangers discussed my life as if I were a case study in financial hardship, rather than a person with agency and choice. That's when Jessica made the comment about my shoes, the one that would replay in my mind for weeks afterward. She pointed to my worn flats with a laugh that was supposed to be affectionate but came out sharp and cutting instead. The entire room turned to look, and I felt the weight of their collective judgment settle on my shoulders like a heavy coat. These women who spent more on single handbags than I spent on clothing in a year were looking at me with a mixture of pity and superiority that made my stomach turn. I excused myself to the restroom, needing a moment away from their scrutiny to collect my thoughts and decide how to handle the rest of the afternoon. In the mirror above the marble sink, I looked at myself and saw exactly what they saw. A woman in an ill-fitting dress and scuffed shoes, carrying a baby she might not be able to provide for properly. For just a moment, I let myself feel the full weight of their assumptions, the crushing pressure of being constantly judged and found wanting. Then I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and typed a message that would change the trajectory of the entire day. The text was simple, just a few words that would set everything in motion. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It's time. Garden Pavilion, Riverside Country Club. 20 minutes. I hit send, tucked my phone away, and returned to the party with the same calm smile I'd worn all afternoon. But something had shifted inside me. A decision had been made. And for the first time in months, I felt like I was about to take control of my own narrative instead of letting others write it for me. The final 20 minutes of the baby shower felt like hours. I returned to my seat and continued to participate in the conversations, thanking guests for their gifts and listening to their advice about everything from sleep schedules to college savings plans. But part of me was elsewhere, calculating timing and wondering if I was making the right choice. The women around me continued their subtle observations about my circumstances, each comment adding another layer to the story they'd constructed about my life. When the black Bentley pulled into the circular drive of the country club, visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the garden pavilion, conversations began to slow. It was an unusual sight at the club, elegant enough to belong, but somehow out of place in the afternoon light. The women near the windows turned to watch as the driver's door opened, and a woman in professional attire stepped out. Maria Gonzalez moved with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from years of working with high-profile families, her posture straight and her expression focused as she approached the entrance to the pavilion. I watched the room's energy shift as Maria appeared in the doorway, scanning the crowd until her eyes found mine. The conversations didn't stop entirely, but they took on a different quality, as women began to whisper questions about who this newcomer might be and why she was here. Maria walked directly to my table, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor, and addressed me with the kind of professional courtesy that left no doubt about our relationship. "Mrs. Martinez," she said, her voice carrying just far enough for the nearby tables to hear. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but we need to discuss the nursery preparations before the contractor arrives tomorrow. The interior designer had some questions about the color scheme for the baby suite, and Dr. Williams called about confirming your schedule for next week's board meeting." The silence that followed was deafening. 27 women who had spent the afternoon discussing my financial struggles suddenly found themselves reconsidering everything they thought they knew about my circumstances. I stood slowly, my hand resting on my rounded belly, and smiled at Maria with genuine warmth. "Of course, Maria. Thank you for coming to get me." I turned to address the room, my voice steady and clear. "Ladies, thank you so much for this lovely afternoon. The gifts are incredibly generous, and I've enjoyed meeting so many of Jessica's friends." I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the tables of women who were staring at me with expressions ranging from confusion to dawning realization. "Maria is our family's assistant, and she's right that we have several things to finalize before the baby arrives." Jessica's face had gone pale, her mouth slightly open as she processed what was happening. The woman who had spent months positioning herself as the generous relative helping her struggling sister-in-law was suddenly faced with evidence that perhaps she didn't know the whole story. I gathered my purse and the small bag of gifts I'd received, moving with the kind of calm deliberation that comes from finally stepping into your own truth. As Maria and I walked toward the exit, I could hear the explosion of whispered conversations beginning behind us. Questions about who I really was, what Maria had meant about board meetings and contractors, and why someone with an assistant would be living in a modest apartment and shopping at thrift stores. I didn't turn back to provide answers or explanations. Instead, I walked out of the garden pavilion with my head held high, ready to finally reveal the real story of who Sarah Martinez actually was, and why I'd chosen to let them all believe something that was only a small part of the truth. The ride home in the Bentley was silent, except for the soft hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of Maria adjusting her notes in the passenger seat. I stared out the tinted windows at the familiar streets of Riverside, seeing them differently now that my carefully constructed facade had begun to crumble. The modest neighborhoods we passed, the strip malls and chain restaurants that had become the backdrop of my daily life, suddenly felt like stage sets from a play I was no longer interested in performing. Maria had been with our family for 6 months, though family was perhaps too strong a word for what Michael and I had become. She'd come highly recommended from an agency that specialized in discretion, the kind of professional who understood that wealthy families often had complicated relationships with their wealth. When I'd first interviewed her, I'd been clear about our unusual circumstances. We needed someone who could help manage the logistics of our real life, while respecting our decision to live publicly as if we had far less than we actually did. She'd listened without judgment as I explained about the medical practice, about the foundation work that consumed most of my free time, about the investment portfolio that had grown beyond our wildest expectations, and about the family who measured our worth by the size of our apartment and the age of our car. Maria had simply nodded and asked practical questions about scheduling and responsibilities, treating our situation as just another variation on the wealthy families she'd worked with before. The apartment looked different when we pulled up to the complex. Maria had been here before, of course, but always discreetly, parking her own modest Honda around the corner and entering through the back stairwell to avoid drawing attention from neighbors who might ask questions. Today, she drove the Bentley right up to the front entrance, and I could see curtains twitching in windows as residents tried to get a better look at the luxury car that had invaded their working-class sanctuary. Inside our 2-bedroom home, the contrast between appearance and reality became even more stark. The thrift store furniture and discount store decorations that had served as props in our performance of financial struggle now felt like artifacts from someone else's life. Maria moved efficiently through the space, gathering files from the hidden safe behind the bookshelf and setting up her laptop on the kitchen table that I'd painted to hide its scratches and wear. Dr. Patricia Williams called while Maria was organizing papers, her voice carrying the kind of urgency that had become familiar over the past year, as our foundation work expanded beyond what either of us had originally envisioned. The practice in the strip mall was just the beginning, the visible part of what had grown into a comprehensive healthcare initiative, serving 3 counties. Patricia and I had started small, using my inheritance and Michael's investment income to fund a single clinic, but word had spread about our approach to community medicine, and opportunities had multiplied faster than we could manage. The phone conversation lasted 20 minutes, covering everything from the new clinic we were opening in San Bernardino to the scholarship program we'd established for nursing students from low-income families. Patricia's excitement was infectious as she described the latest batch of applications we'd received from medical students who wanted to join our network of community-focused practices. These were young doctors who shared our vision of healthcare as a human right rather than a luxury service, and they were willing to work for less money in exchange for the opportunity to make a real difference in underserved communities. When I hung up, Maria was watching me with the kind of expression that made it clear she understood the weight of what we were building together. She'd seen the financial statements, the legal documents, the strategic plans that mapped out our 5-year vision for transforming healthcare delivery in Southern California. She knew that the woman Jessica's friends had pitied that afternoon was actually sitting on a foundation worth several $1 million and growing every quarter. Michael had inherited his trust fund at 25, a fact his family conveniently forgot when they discussed our financial situation. His grandfather had been a shrewd investor who'd built a fortune in real estate during the post-war boom, and that wealth had been carefully managed and grown by successive generations. When Michael gained access to his portion, we'd both been overwhelmed by the responsibility of stewarding that kind of money in a way that honored both his grandfather's legacy and our own values. The decision to live modestly hadn't been about hiding our wealth from his family, at least not initially. It had been about proving to ourselves that we could build something meaningful without relying on inherited privilege. We wanted to understand what it felt like to budget groceries and worry about rent, to make choices based on necessity rather than convenience. That experience had shaped everything we did afterward, informing our approach to the foundation and our understanding of the communities we served. But somewhere along the way, our experiment in simple living had become a prison of expectations. Jessica and Linda's assumptions about our circumstances had calcified into an identity we felt obligated to maintain, even as it became increasingly divorced from reality. Every family gathering became a performance, every conversation a careful navigation of what we could and couldn't reveal about our actual situation. The weight of maintaining that facade had grown heavier with each passing month, especially as the foundation's work expanded and required more of our time and attention. The pregnancy had complicated everything exponentially. Jessica's insistence on planning the baby shower, her determination to help us through what she saw as our time of financial need, had put us in an impossible position. We couldn't accept her charity without feeling like frauds, but we couldn't refuse without revealing the truth we'd worked so hard to protect. The past 8 months had been a constant balancing act, trying to honor her generous intentions while staying true to our own complicated relationship with money and privilege. Maria pulled out a folder thick with architectural plans and contractor estimates, spreading them across the kitchen table like a roadmap to our real life. The nursery she'd mentioned at the country club was just one part of a major renovation project we'd been planning for months. The house we actually lived in was 15 minutes away in a gated community. A modern 4-bedroom home with enough space for the family we hoped to build and the work we were doing together. We'd bought the house 2 years ago but had never moved in, using it instead as office space for the foundation and a place to host meetings with donors and medical partners. The irony wasn't lost on me that we owned a home worth more than most people would earn in a lifetime, while living in an apartment that reinforced every stereotype Jessica and her friends held about young couples struggling to make ends meet. The renovation plans were ambitious, transforming the house from a sterile showcase into a warm family home. The nursery would occupy the room that had previously served as my office, with custom built-ins designed to grow with our child and space for the nanny's quarters that Maria would eventually occupy full-time. We'd hired an interior designer who specialized in creating beautiful, functional spaces for busy families, someone who understood that luxury didn't have to mean ostentation. Michael arrived home while Maria and I were reviewing fabric samples for the nursery, his expression carefully neutral in the way it always was when he'd been with his family. He'd learned to compartmentalize our 2 lives with a skill that sometimes worried me, switching between the struggling son his mother worried about and the foundation executive who made decisions affecting thousands of people's healthcare access. Today, though, something was different. He looked tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion, and I realized that maintaining our double life was wearing on him too. The constant performance, the careful monitoring of every word and purchase, the weight of letting his family believe something that was fundamentally untrue about who we were and what we were capable of. When he saw Maria's laptop open on the table and the architectural plans spread across the surface, his shoulders sagged with what looked like relief. "How did it go today?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Jessica had undoubtedly called him within minutes of Maria's arrival at the country club, demanding explanations and probably accusations about what kind of game we'd been playing with the family. I described the afternoon's events while Maria continued working, organizing schedules and confirming appointments with the quiet efficiency that made her invaluable to our increasingly complex life. Michael listened without interrupting, occasionally wincing when I recounted particularly pointed comments from Jessica's friends, or moments when the performance had felt especially hollow. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time, staring at the plans for our real home and the life we'd been building in secret. "I got 3 calls from Jessica and 2 from my mother," he finally said. "They want to know who Maria is, why she was talking about board meetings and contractors, and whether we've been lying to them about our situation." The question hung in the air between us, loaded with months of accumulated guilt and resentment. Had we been lying? The apartment was real, our modest lifestyle was genuine, and the work we did at the community clinic was exactly as demanding and meaningful as it appeared. But we'd also allowed his family to draw conclusions that weren't entirely accurate, to construct a narrative about our circumstances that served their need to feel superior and generous. Maria closed her laptop and began gathering the papers, sensing that Michael and I needed space to process the day's events and decide how to move forward. Before leaving, she handed me a printed schedule for the following week, packed with foundation board meetings, site visits to potential clinic locations, and interviews with medical staff candidates. Looking at that schedule, I was reminded of who I really was beyond the roles of struggling daughter-in-law and grateful charity case. Dr. Sarah Martinez, co-founder of the Martinez-Williams Foundation for Community Healthcare. Board member of 3 nonprofit organizations focused on healthcare access and medical education. Silent partner in a network of clinics that had treated over 15,000 patients in the past 2 years. A woman who'd used inherited wealth and investment income to build something that mattered, something that would outlast any family drama or social expectations. After Maria left, Michael and I sat at our small kitchen table surrounded by evidence of our real life and our fake one. The architectural plans represented our future, the life we'd been building in private, while maintaining a public facade that had become increasingly difficult to sustain. The thrift store dishes and secondhand furniture represented the story we'd allowed his family to believe, the performance we'd maintained for reasons that suddenly seemed less compelling than they had that morning. "I'm tired of pretending," Michael said quietly, voicing what we'd both been feeling for months. "I'm tired of letting them think we're something we're not, and I'm tired of feeling guilty about what we've built together." I reached across the table and took his hand, feeling the calluses he'd developed from volunteer work at the clinics, and the small scar on his thumb from helping install shelving at the new San Bernardino location. These were the hands of someone who'd chosen to work for his money rather than simply inherit it, who'd found ways to honor his privilege while staying connected to the communities we served. The foundation work had become the center of our lives in ways we hadn't anticipated when we'd started with that single clinic in the strip mall. What had begun as an experiment in using wealth responsibly had evolved into a comprehensive approach to community development, combining direct healthcare services with education, research, and advocacy work. We employed 47 people across our various initiatives, from medical staff and administrative workers to community outreach coordinators and policy researchers. The board meetings Maria had mentioned weren't ceremonial gatherings but working sessions, where we made decisions about expanding services, developing new programs, and responding to community needs. The contractor she'd referenced was preparing to build our 4th clinic. This one focused specifically on maternal and infant health services in an area where the nearest hospital was over an hour away. These weren't the activities of people struggling to make ends meet, but they also weren't the lifestyle choices of people who'd inherited wealth without earning it. Every decision we made was informed by our months of living on a tight budget, of understanding what it meant to choose between competing necessities, of seeing how financial stress affected every aspect of family life. That experience had made us better stewards of the resources we'd been given, more thoughtful about how we used money, and more connected to the communities we served. The pregnancy had added urgency to questions we'd been avoiding about how to raise a child in the space between our public image and our private reality. We wanted our son or daughter to understand the value of money without being spoiled by it, to appreciate privilege without taking it for granted, to see wealth as a tool for service rather than a source of identity. But we also wanted to be honest about who we were and what we'd accomplished together, to model integrity rather than performance. Sitting in our modest apartment that night, surrounded by evidence of both lives we were living, I realized that the baby shower had forced a decision I'd been postponing for months. We could continue the elaborate performance that had become second nature, maintaining the fiction that served his family's need to feel superior and generous. Or we could step into our real lives publicly, accepting whatever consequences came with that choice. The decision felt enormous and inevitable at the same time, like standing at the edge of a cliff you'd been approaching for months without realizing it. Tomorrow, Maria would arrive to drive us to the house where we actually belonged, where the nursery was being prepared, and our real life was waiting. The question was whether we'd finally be brave enough to live there openly, to let his family and everyone else see who we really were beneath the carefully constructed facade we'd maintained for so long. Michael squeezed my hand and looked around the apartment that had served as both home and stage set for the past 3 years. "When the baby comes," he said, "I want them to know they're real parents, not the versions we've been performing for other people's comfort." I nodded, feeling something shift inside me like tectonic plates realigning after months of pressure. The woman who'd sat quietly through Jessica's patronizing speech that afternoon was ready to step aside, making room for the person I'd become, through our work, our choices, and our shared commitment to building something meaningful together. Tomorrow, we would begin the complicated process of introducing our families to who we really were, regardless of how they chose to receive that information. The first real crack in our carefully maintained facade appeared 3 weeks after we'd announced the pregnancy to Michael's family. Linda had insisted on taking me shopping for maternity clothes, presenting it as a bonding experience between mother and daughter-in-law, though her tone carried the unmistakable subtext of charity work. She picked me up in her silver Mercedes, chatting brightly about all the wonderful stores she'd discovered over the years, places where quality doesn't have to break the bank. The mall she chose was clearly selected for its moderate price points rather than its selection, a mid-tier shopping center where she could demonstrate her generosity without risking that I might develop expensive tastes. As we walked past storefront after storefront, Linda kept up a running commentary about sales and discounts, pointing out clearance racks with the enthusiasm of someone who'd never actually needed to shop them herself. Her intentions were kind, I reminded myself, even as her assumptions stung. In the first maternity store, Linda immediately gravitated toward the sale section, holding up pieces with visible wear or minor defects while praising their classic styles and timeless appeal. When I showed interest in a dress from the regular priced section, she gently steered me away with comments about being practical and realistic about our budget. The saleswoman, clearly picking up on the dynamics, began showing us only items from the clearance area, treating me with the particular brand of customer service reserved for people shopping beyond their means. I found myself nodding along, accepting Linda's choices and agreeing with her assessments about what would be sensible for someone in my position. Each acquiescence felt like another small betrayal of my actual circumstances, but the alternative would have meant revealing truths I wasn't ready to share. When Linda insisted on paying for everything, waving away my protests with declarations about family helping family, I felt the weight of deception settling more heavily on my shoulders. The drive home was filled with Linda's advice about budgeting for baby expenses, delivered with the authority of someone who'd never had to choose between competing necessities. She spoke about generic brands and hand-me-downs, about the importance of accepting help graciously, and about how young couples today needed to be more realistic about their expectations. Her words were wrapped in concern and affection, but underneath ran a current of satisfaction at being needed, at having found a daughter-in-law who required her guidance and support. Michael was waiting when we returned to the apartment, and I could see him processing the bags Linda carried in with such obvious pride in her generosity. She recounted our shopping trip with the detailed enthusiasm of someone describing a successful rescue mission, emphasizing how grateful I'd been for her help, and how carefully we'd chosen each practical, affordable piece. I smiled and nodded at appropriate moments, playing the role of the thankful recipient while Michael's expression grew increasingly uncomfortable. After Linda left, Michael and I sat surrounded by the bags of maternity clothes that represented everything wrong with the situation we'd created. The garments themselves were fine, perfectly adequate for their intended purpose, but they carried the weight of assumptions and expectations that made them feel like costumes for a play we no longer wanted to perform. I held up a beige blouse with small flowers, the kind of safe, unremarkable piece that would reinforce every stereotype about my circumstances. "She means well," Michael said, though his voice lacked conviction. We both knew that Linda's generosity came with strings attached, that each gift created another layer of obligation and another reason for her to maintain her position as the family's benefactor. The shopping trip had established a dynamic that would be difficult to escape, positioning me permanently as the recipient of her largesse, rather than as an equal member of the family. The pattern repeated itself over the following weeks, each interaction reinforcing the narrative Linda and Jessica had constructed about our situation. Jessica began forwarding me emails about baby bargains and budget-friendly nursery ideas, always with encouraging notes about how creative I could be with limited resources. She recommended consignment shops and online marketplaces, sharing stories about friends who'd furnished entire nurseries for practically nothing, with just a little ingenuity and persistence. These communications came daily, sometimes multiple times per day, creating a constant reminder of my supposed financial limitations. Jessica's tone was consistently supportive and encouraging, but the underlying message was clear. She saw me as someone who needed guidance navigating a world of financial constraints. Each forwarded article about DIY baby projects or discount shopping strategies felt like another small paper cut, individually minor but cumulatively damaging to my sense of self. The weekly family dinners became exercises in managing expectations and maintaining consistency in our performance. Linda would ask pointed questions about our preparations for the baby, always framed as maternal concern but clearly designed to assess our readiness and capability. She'd inquire about doctor visits, prenatal vitamins, and nursery planning, with the air of someone conducting a welfare check rather than making conversation. Jessica joined these interrogations with her own brand of helpful oversight, offering to coordinate baby shower planning and suggesting ways to quote, stretch our budget for the various expenses we'd be facing. Her recommendations always centered around accepting help from family and friends, finding creative alternatives to expensive baby gear, and generally approaching parenthood with appropriately modest expectations. The conversations left me feeling infantilized and frustrated, treated like a child who needed constant guidance, rather than a capable adult preparing for motherhood. The most painful moments came when Linda would share stories about other young couples in the family, comparing their situations to ours with thinly veiled satisfaction. She'd mentioned cousins who'd started their families in better financial circumstances, nieces and nephews who'd been able to provide certain advantages we presumably couldn't afford. These comparisons were delivered with sympathetic sighs and reassurances that love is what really matters, but the implicit rankings were unmistakable. Michael began showing signs of strain as the pregnancy progressed, and the family's involvement intensified. He'd grown up with their expectations and judgments, but seeing them applied to me and our unborn child triggered protective instincts he hadn't expected. After particularly difficult family gatherings, I'd find him staring at his laptop screen, scrolling through foundation reports and clinic statistics, as if trying to remind himself who we really were beneath the roles we'd agreed to play. The foundation work provided a refuge from the emotional complexity of family dynamics, but it also created increasing pressure to maintain our double life. Board meetings with major donors required a level of sophistication and strategic thinking that sat uncomfortably with the image of financial struggle we presented to Michael's family. I'd spend Tuesday mornings discussing million-dollar grants and expansion strategies, then Tuesday evenings listening to Jessica's advice about finding affordable baby clothes. Dr. Patricia Williams noticed the tension during one of our strategy sessions, when I'd been particularly distracted by a text from Linda about a wonderful opportunity to receive hand-me-down baby furniture from a family friend. Patricia's raised eyebrow and gentle inquiry about whether everything was all right opened a conversation I'd been avoiding about the psychological cost of living multiple versions of my life simultaneously. Explaining the situation to Patricia felt like confession, admitting to a kind of fraud that went beyond simple privacy into active deception. She listened without judgment as I described the apartment, the shopping trips, the constant advice about budgeting and accepting charity. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, before asking whether the stress of maintaining such an elaborate performance might be affecting my health, and by extension, the baby's well-being. The question forced me to confront realities I'd been pushing aside in my determination to keep everyone happy and all situations under control. The constant vigilance required to maintain our facade was exhausting in ways I hadn't fully acknowledged. Every conversation with Michael's family required careful consideration of what I could and couldn't say. Every purchase needed to align with our supposed circumstances. Every decision had to be filtered through the lens of what someone in our performed financial situation would reasonably choose. Sleep became elusive as the pregnancy progressed and the foundation work expanded. I'd lie awake calculating the emotional and logistical costs of maintaining our double life, weighing them against the potential consequences of revealing the truth. Michael would find me sitting up in bed at 3 a.m, scrolling through emails from Jessica about baby shower planning, or reviewing architectural plans for the clinic expansion we were funding but couldn't discuss with anyone in his family. The breaking point began to crystallize during a particularly uncomfortable dinner at David and Jessica's house, where the conversation centered around their recent vacation to Europe and their plans for renovating their already impressive home. Jessica described their experiences with casual confidence, dropping names of expensive restaurants and luxury hotels, while Linda nodded approvingly at each extravagant detail. When the conversation turned to us, the shift in tone was immediate and obvious. "You two are so smart to wait until you're more established before taking big trips," Jessica said with the kind of patronizing approval usually reserved for children who'd made wise choices about their allowances. "There will be plenty of time for travel once you're in a better position to afford it." Linda murmured agreement, adding something about the importance of priorities and living within your means. Michael's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and I realized that his tolerance for the performance was reaching its limits too. We'd both grown tired of being talked about as if we weren't present, of having our choices and capabilities discussed as subjects for family analysis rather than personal decisions made by competent adults. The condescension that had once felt like a minor annoyance was beginning to feel genuinely insulting. The evening continued with Jessica's detailed planning for the baby shower, which had evolved from a simple family gathering into an elaborate charity event designed to showcase her generosity and organizational skills. She'd invited her entire social circle, women I'd never met who would be attending specifically to participate in the philanthropic experience of helping a young couple in need. The guest list had grown to include neighbors, book club members, and tennis partners, all of whom had been briefed on our circumstances and encouraged to bring gifts that would be truly helpful given our situation. Listening to Jessica describe the shower planning felt like hearing someone organize a fundraiser for disaster relief, complete with strategic gift coordination and careful attention to ensuring that every aspect of the event would demonstrate proper support for the less fortunate. She'd researched registries at discount stores, suggested specific items that would provide maximum utility for minimum cost, and even arranged for professional photography to document the event and the generosity of all participants. The transformation of what should have been a celebration into a charity showcase felt like the final insult in a series of increasingly painful interactions. I excused myself to the bathroom and stood in front of the mirror, looking at my reflection and wondering how much longer I could maintain the increasingly elaborate performance that our simple decision to live modestly had become. The woman staring back at me looked tired and stressed, carrying the weight of deceptions that had grown far beyond their original intention. When I returned to the dining room, the conversation had shifted to baby names and nursery themes, with Linda and Jessica offering suggestions based on what they considered appropriate for our circumstances. They'd researched budget-friendly decorating ideas, found examples of beautiful nurseries created with minimal expense, and prepared detailed recommendations for making our presumably small space work efficiently for a growing family. Their enthusiasm was genuine, their intentions kind, but the entire conversation felt like another layer of performance art in which I was simultaneously the subject and the unwilling participant. The drive home that night was silent, except for the soft hum of our aging Honda's engine, a car we'd deliberately chosen for its modest appearance, despite having the means to afford something more comfortable. Michael gripped the steering wheel with unnecessary force, and I could see the muscles in his jaw working as he processed the evening's conversations. We'd both reached a point where the emotional cost of maintaining our facade was beginning to outweigh whatever benefits we'd originally hoped to achieve. "I can't do this anymore," Michael said as we pulled into our apartment complex parking lot, voicing what we'd both been thinking for weeks. The exhaustion in his voice wasn't just physical but psychological, the weariness that comes from living a lie that's become too complex to sustain. We sat in the car for several minutes after he turned off the engine, both of us staring at the modest building that had become both our home and our prison. Inside the apartment, surrounded by the props of our performed poverty, we began the conversation that would ultimately lead to the events at the baby shower. We talked about the foundation work that was expanding beyond our capacity to manage privately, about the baby who would inherit not just our wealth but also our complicated relationship with it, and about the family dynamics that had trapped us in roles we no longer wanted to play. The pregnancy had added urgency to questions we'd been avoiding about authenticity, integrity, and the kind of example we wanted to set for our child. We could continue the elaborate performance that had become second nature, accepting the emotional costs as the price of family harmony. Or we could find the courage to live honestly, regardless of how Michael's family chose to respond to the revelation that their assumptions about us had been fundamentally incorrect from the beginning. The morning of the baby shower arrived with an unseasonable chill that seemed to match my growing sense of dread about the day ahead. I'd spent most of the previous night awake, alternating between reviewing foundation documents and staring at the ceiling while trying to prepare myself mentally for what Jessica had planned. Maria had confirmed all the arrangements the evening before, her professional demeanor masking what I suspected was her own discomfort with the elaborate performance we were about to navigate. Michael left early for a scheduled site visit at our newest clinic location, a commitment we couldn't reschedule despite the timing conflict with his family's event. His absence meant I'd be facing the day without the one person who truly understood the weight of maintaining our facade, though I suspected he was grateful for a legitimate excuse to avoid witnessing what he knew would be another painful exercise in family dynamics. Getting dressed felt like preparing for battle, each choice deliberate and calculated to maintain the image Jessica's guests expected to see. The navy maternity dress from our thrift store expedition hung in the closet, like a costume waiting for its final performance, and I stared at it for several minutes before putting it on. The fabric felt rough against my skin, a constant reminder of the role I was playing and the assumptions that would greet me at the country club. The drive to the venue took longer than expected, traffic moving slowly through construction zones that seemed to multiply every mile of the journey. I used the extra time to practice responses to questions I knew would come, rehearsing gracious replies to comments about my circumstances and grateful reactions to the charitable gestures Jessica had orchestrated. By the time I reached the garden pavilion, I felt as prepared as possible for an event I desperately wished I could avoid. The parking lot was already half full when I arrived, luxury cars arranged in neat rows like silent testimony to the economic divide between the guests and the guest of honor. I parked my aging Honda near the back, noting how it stood out among the sleek sedans and gleaming SUVs that surrounded it. Walking toward the entrance, I could see through the floor-to-ceiling windows that the party was already in full swing. Women in designer outfits clustered around elaborate decorations while servers circulated with champagne and appetizers. Jessica spotted me immediately as I entered, her smile bright and welcoming as she hurried over to greet me with the kind of enthusiastic embrace that photographers love to capture. She'd clearly spent considerable time and money creating the perfect setting for her charitable showcase, every detail designed to demonstrate both her generosity and her organizational capabilities. The decorations were elegant without being ostentatious, expensive enough to impress her friends while maintaining the appropriate tone for an event benefiting someone less fortunate. The introductions began immediately, Jessica presenting me to her social circle with the kind of warm authority that established her as both hostess and benefactor. Each introduction included carefully crafted background information about my circumstances, delivered with sympathetic smiles and encouraging words about the community coming together to support young families in need. I shook hands and accepted air kisses from women whose names I immediately forgot, their expressions mixing polite interest with the particular brand of satisfaction that comes from participating in organized charity. The conversations that followed were exercises in careful navigation, each guest having been briefed on my situation and prepared with appropriate topics and questions. They asked about my pregnancy with the kind of gentle concern usually reserved for people facing medical crises, inquired about my preparations for the baby with obvious awareness of my presumed financial limitations, and offered advice about budgeting and resource management with the authority of people who'd never had to worry about either. One particularly well-meaning woman spent 10 minutes describing discount stores and clearance sales, sharing detailed strategies for finding quality baby items at affordable prices. Her recommendations came with personal anecdotes about friends who'd managed to furnish entire nurseries for practically nothing, stories that were clearly meant to inspire and encourage, but instead felt like tutorials in poverty management, delivered by someone who'd never experienced actual financial constraint. The gift table grew throughout the afternoon, each carefully chosen present, representing not just generosity but strategic thinking about what would be most helpful for someone in my circumstances. The items were practical rather than indulgent, budget-conscious rather than luxurious, selected with obvious attention to providing maximum utility for minimum cost. Each gift tag included encouraging notes about making the most of parenthood regardless of financial circumstances, advice that was undoubtedly well-intentioned but felt increasingly patronizing as the pile grew. Jessica orchestrated the entire event with the precision of a professional fundraiser, ensuring that every moment reinforced the narrative she'd constructed about the gathering's purpose. The games were designed to showcase her creativity while maintaining appropriate themes about resourcefulness and making do with less. The refreshments were elegant but not extravagant, expensive enough to demonstrate proper hospitality, while avoiding any appearance of insensitivity to my presumed circumstances. The photography was particularly elaborate, with a professional hired specifically to document both the event itself and the generosity of all participants. Jessica posed for pictures with different groups of guests, always ensuring that I was positioned as the grateful recipient of their collective charity. The photographer captured moments of gift-giving and advice-sharing, creating what would undoubtedly become a visual record of successful community philanthropy. As the afternoon progressed, I found myself increasingly isolated despite being surrounded by people. The conversations flowed around me rather than including me, guests discussing my situation and my needs, with the kind of clinical detachment usually reserved for case studies. They spoke about young couples today, about the challenges facing families without adequate resources, about the importance of community support during difficult times, all while I sat among them like a living example of the social problems they were addressing through their generosity. The breaking point came during Jessica's speech, when she stood before the assembled guests and delivered what amounted to a presentation about charitable giving and community responsibility. She spoke eloquently about the importance of supporting family members during challenging times, about the satisfaction that comes from helping others navigate difficult circumstances, and about the example they were all setting through their participation in this meaningful event. But it was her specific comments about my situation that pushed me beyond my tolerance for the elaborate performance we'd been maintaining. Jessica described my thrift store shopping and coupon clipping with the kind of admiring tone usually reserved for particularly impressive charitable works, painting a picture of noble poverty that bore little resemblance to the deliberate choices Michael and I had made about how to live while building our foundation. She spoke about my brave face in dealing with financial challenges, about the inspiring example I provided of making the best of difficult circumstances, and about how lucky our baby would be to have parents who understood the value of hard work and careful budgeting. Each word felt like another layer of mischaracterization, another addition to a narrative that had grown so far from reality that it had become its own form of fiction. The final insult came when she made her comment about my shoes, pointing them out to the entire room as evidence of my resourcefulness and determination to make things last. The laughter that followed wasn't malicious, but it was unmistakably condescending, the kind of amused appreciation people show for quaint examples of behavior they've never had to consider for themselves. I felt the weight of every assumption they'd made about my life, every patronizing kindness they'd offered, every charitable gesture that had positioned me as the grateful recipient of their largesse. That's when I excused myself and sent the text message that would change the trajectory of the entire day. Sitting in the marble bathroom of the country club, staring at my reflection in a mirror that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, I finally admitted to myself that the performance had gone too far. We'd allowed a simple decision about lifestyle to become an elaborate deception that was hurting everyone involved, including the people who genuinely thought they were helping us through a difficult time. When Maria arrived 20 minutes later, the transformation was immediate and undeniable. The conversations stopped mid-sentence as guests processed the appearance of someone who clearly didn't fit the narrative they'd been given about my circumstances. Maria's professional demeanor, her obvious familiarity with me, and her casual references to contractors and board meetings created cognitive dissonance that rippled through the room like a stone thrown into still water. The drive away from the country club felt like escaping from an elaborate theater production, where I'd been playing a role that no longer fit. Maria maintained her professional composure throughout the journey, but I could sense her relief at finally being able to acknowledge our real relationship publicly. We'd worked together for months under conditions of secrecy that had made even simple logistics unnecessarily complicated, always careful to avoid any interaction that might reveal the true nature of our lives. The house we drove to was everything the apartment wasn't, a testament to what we'd actually built together, rather than what we'd allowed others to believe about our circumstances. The architecture was modern, but warm, designed for both family life and the foundation work that had become central to our identity. Maria had been overseeing the final preparations for our move, coordinating with contractors and designers to create spaces that would accommodate both our growing family and our expanding professional responsibilities. Walking through rooms that would soon become our real home felt like stepping into a life we'd been building in secret for years. The nursery was nearly complete, decorated in colors and themes we'd chosen based on our own preferences, rather than what others thought we could afford. The office spaces were equipped for the kind of strategic work the foundation required, with conference capabilities for board meetings and secure storage for sensitive documents. Michael arrived an hour later, his expression reflecting the same mixture of relief and apprehension I'd been feeling since leaving the country club. The day's events had forced decisions we'd been postponing for months, conversations about authenticity and integrity that could no longer be avoided. We sat in what would become our family room, surrounded by evidence of who we really were, and began planning how to navigate the aftermath of our unintended revelation. The phone calls started before dinner, Jessica demanding explanations, and Linda expressing confusion about what she'd heard from various guests. Michael handled most of the conversations with patience I couldn't have managed, explaining our circumstances without defensiveness or apology. He described the foundation work, the deliberate choice to live modestly during our early years together, and the complex motivations that had led us to let his family maintain their assumptions about our financial situation. The reactions were as varied as we'd expected, ranging from hurt feelings about deception, to genuine curiosity about our work, to defensive anger about being misled. Jessica was particularly vocal about feeling betrayed, though her complaints focused more on social embarrassment than any real harm we'd caused. Linda's response was more complex, mixing disappointment about our secrecy with obvious pride in what we'd accomplished, though she struggled to reconcile her image of us as people who needed her help with the reality of our independent success. The foundation board meeting, scheduled for the following week, provided an opportunity to move forward without dwelling on family drama. Dr. Patricia Williams expressed relief that we were finally living openly, noting that the stress of maintaining our double life had been affecting both our work performance and our health. The other board members, who'd known about our unusual living situation, welcomed the opportunity to work more efficiently, without the constraints of secrecy. The media attention that followed was unexpected but manageable, with local newspapers picking up the story of a young couple who'd used inherited wealth to build a foundation focused on community healthcare. The coverage was generally positive, emphasizing our commitment to understanding the communities we served and our innovative approaches to combining direct service with policy advocacy. Several medical journals requested interviews about our model for community-based healthcare delivery. The baby arrived 6 weeks later, a healthy daughter we named Elena after Michael's grandmother, the woman who'd first taught him about using privilege responsibly. The nursery we'd designed welcomed her with warmth and comfort that had nothing to do with expense and everything to do with love and preparation. Maria became her nanny with the kind of professional dedication that made our transition to parenthood smoother than we'd dared hope. Jessica's relationship with us remained complicated, but gradually improved as she adjusted to the reality of our circumstances. She struggled initially with feeling foolish about her charitable efforts, though we emphasized repeatedly that her intentions had been genuinely kind, and that we appreciated her desire to help family members she believed were struggling. The awkwardness faded gradually as Elena's presence shifted family dynamics away from financial comparisons toward shared celebration of new life. Linda's adjustment was more complete, her pride in our accomplishments eventually overcoming her disappointment about our secrecy. She became one of the Foundation's most enthusiastic supporters, using her social connections to introduce us to potential donors and advocates. Her transformation from patronizing benefactor to proud grandmother was perhaps the most rewarding outcome of our decision to live honestly. The Foundation work expanded significantly once we stopped trying to hide our involvement and capabilities. Operating openly allowed us to pursue larger grants, more ambitious projects, and partnerships with major medical institutions that had previously been impossible due to our secrecy requirements. The network of community clinics grew to serve 7 counties, and our scholarship programs began attracting national attention from medical education organizations. Elena's first year was marked by the kind of normalcy we'd been seeking since the early days of our marriage. Family gatherings where conversations focused on her development rather than our circumstances. Holidays celebrated without the undercurrent of financial judgment that had characterized previous years. She grew up surrounded by evidence of meaningful work rather than material excess, learning from infancy that wealth was a tool for service rather than a source of identity. The thrift store maternity dress remained in my closet for months after Elena's birth, not as a reminder of deception but as a symbol of the complex relationship between appearance and reality, between what people assume and what's actually true. Eventually, I donated it to a local organization that provides professional clothing for women entering the workforce, where it could serve someone who actually needed the kind of help Jessica's friends had thought they were providing. Looking back, the baby shower marked the end of a chapter in our lives defined by other people's expectations, and the beginning of one shaped by our own values and choices. The embarrassment and anger I'd felt that afternoon gave way to gratitude for the clarity the experience had provided, forcing us to confront contradictions we'd been avoiding and choose authenticity over performance. Elena's presence changed everything in ways we hadn't anticipated, her innocent dependence making it impossible to maintain the elaborate facades that had once seemed manageable. Raising her with integrity required us to model honesty in all aspects of our lives, including the complicated relationships with family members who'd been operating from incomplete information about who we were and what we'd built together. The work continues to grow and evolve, each new clinic and program reflecting lessons we learned during our months of living simply and understanding intimately the communities we serve. The Foundation now employs over 200 people across multiple states, all working toward the vision of healthcare as a human right, rather than a luxury service. Elena accompanies us to ribbon cuttings and board meetings, learning from toddlerhood that work can be both meaningful and joyful when it serves purposes larger than personal advancement. The Bentley still sits in our garage, used primarily for Foundation events and meetings, where professional appearance matters for building credibility with potential partners. Most days, we drive more modest vehicles that reflect our continued commitment to living without ostentation, though now that choice comes from genuine preference rather than performance for others' benefit. Elena will grow up understanding the difference between having resources and flaunting them, between using wealth responsibly and hiding from its responsibilities. The country club where the baby shower was held eventually became one of the venues where we host fundraising events for the Foundation, the same rooms where I was once pitied, now serving as spaces where we celebrate achievements and plan expansions. The irony isn't lost on any of us, but it serves as a reminder that circumstances can change dramatically when people are willing to live authentically rather than maintaining facades that serve no one well. Jessica occasionally mentions the baby shower when we're together, usually with embarrassment about her assumptions and the elaborate charity performance she'd orchestrated. We've assured her repeatedly that no lasting harm was done, that her intentions were genuinely kind, and that the experience ultimately forced us to make decisions about honesty and authenticity that needed to be made regardless of the circumstances that prompted them. The lessons Elena will inherit include understanding that identity isn't determined by material possessions or other people's assumptions, that meaningful work requires both privilege and responsibility, and that authenticity is always preferable to performance, even when the truth is more complicated than what others want to believe. She's growing up in a world where her parents' choices are aligned with their values, where the work they do matches their public identity, and where family relationships are based on truth rather than carefully maintained fictions. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we'd been honest from the beginning, if we'd never allowed Michael's family to construct their narrative about our circumstances and capabilities. Perhaps the relationships would have developed differently. Perhaps the charitable impulses would have been directed elsewhere. Perhaps the entire dynamic would have avoided the complexity and pain that characterized those months of deception. But I also recognize that our experience of living modestly, of understanding intimately what it means to budget carefully and make choices based on necessity rather than preference, informed everything we built afterward. The foundation's effectiveness comes partly from our genuine understanding of the communities we serve, from having experienced firsthand the stress of financial constraint and the weight of others' assumptions about what that means. Elena represents the future we're building, a world where healthcare is accessible regardless of economic circumstances, where young families don't have to choose between competing necessities, where community support comes without condescension or judgment. She'll grow up knowing that her comfortable life comes with responsibilities to others, that privilege unused is opportunity wasted, and that the best way to honor inherited advantages is to use them in service of people who weren't born with the same advantages. The baby shower that was meant to showcase charity became instead a catalyst for authenticity, forcing us to choose between maintaining comfortable lies and embracing complicated truths. Elena will never know the version of her parents who lived in that modest apartment and accepted patronizing advice about budgeting and resourcefulness. But she'll benefit from the lessons we learned during those months about what matters most in building a meaningful life together. The weeks following the baby shower revelation transformed our lives in ways I hadn't anticipated when I'd sent that simple text message to Maria. The ripple effects extended far beyond Michael's family, touching every aspect of our carefully compartmentalized existence and forcing us to rebuild relationships that had been founded on incomplete truths. The process was simultaneously liberating and exhausting, requiring us to navigate complex emotional terrain while managing the practical challenges of living openly for the first time in years. Michael's mother, Linda, struggled more than anyone with the adjustment to our new reality, her entire understanding of our relationship having been built on assumptions about our financial vulnerability and need for her guidance. The shopping trips and well-meaning advice about budgeting had given her a sense of purpose and importance that she now had to find elsewhere, creating a period of awkward readjustment as we all learned to interact without the artificial dynamic that had previously defined our connection. Her initial reaction was hurt confusion, mixed with defensive anger about being deceived, though she couldn't articulate exactly what harm had been done to her, beyond the embarrassment of having offered help to people who didn't need it. The conversations that followed were difficult, but necessary, with Michael patiently explaining our motivations while acknowledging that our choices had created unintended consequences for everyone involved. Linda's pride in our accomplishments eventually overcame her wounded feelings, but the transition took months of careful rebuilding. Jessica's response was more complex, combining genuine hurt about the deception with professional embarrassment about the elaborate charity showcase she'd orchestrated. The baby shower had become a topic of conversation in her social circle, with guests asking questions about our real circumstances and expressing confusion about why they'd been invited to participate in what they now understood to be essentially a performance. Her carefully cultivated image as a thoughtful organizer of meaningful charitable events had been complicated by the revelation that the intended beneficiaries hadn't actually needed charity. The social media aftermath was particularly challenging for Jessica, who documented the entire event with the kind of detailed photography and commentary that had become standard for her gatherings. The posts celebrating community generosity and successful charitable giving now felt hollow and misleading, forcing her to either acknowledge the deception publicly or simply let the misinformation stand. She chose a middle path, quietly updating her social media presence without directly addressing the changed circumstances, though the awkwardness lingered for months. Dr. Patricia Williams observed the family drama with the kind of clinical detachment that made her an excellent medical professional, but also a valuable advisor during emotionally charged situations. She'd seen the stress our double life had created, noting changes in my behavior and decision-making that had affected our work together. Her relief at our newfound transparency was evident in our improved collaboration, the Foundation's strategic planning becoming more efficient and effective, without the constraints of secrecy. The Foundation board meetings scheduled for the week after the baby shower became a celebration of our ability to work openly, rather than a crisis management session. The other members, who'd known about our living situation but respected our privacy, welcomed the opportunity to engage more directly with potential donors and community partners. The expansion plans that had been constrained by our need for discretion could now move forward with the full weight of our commitment and resources behind them. The media attention that followed was unexpected but largely positive, with local newspapers and healthcare journals expressing interest in our model for community-based medical practice. The story of young inheritors using wealth responsibly to address healthcare access issues resonated with audiences tired of stories about entitled rich kids wasting family money. Several national publications requested interviews about our approach to philanthropy and community development. The interview requests forced us to articulate publicly the philosophy we'd been developing privately for years, explaining how our months of living modestly had informed our understanding of the communities we served. The experience of budgeting carefully and making choices based on necessity rather than preference had given us insights into the daily realities faced by our patients and their families. That understanding shaped every decision we made about clinic locations, service offerings, and patient care protocols. Our approach to healthcare delivery emphasized dignity and accessibility, recognizing that poverty often creates barriers to medical care that go beyond simple financial inability to pay. The clinic designs reflected this understanding, creating spaces that felt welcoming and professional rather than institutional and intimidating. The staff training programs we developed focused on treating every patient with respect, regardless of their ability to pay, understanding that healthcare is a human right rather than a luxury service. The scholarship programs we'd established for medical students from underserved communities began attracting national attention from medical education organizations. The program design reflected our belief that healthcare professionals should reflect the diversity of the communities they serve, with particular emphasis on supporting students who plan to work in community-based practices rather than pursuing more lucrative specialties. The scholarship recipients often came from backgrounds similar to those of our patients, bringing cultural competence and personal understanding that enhanced the quality of care we could provide. Elena's birth 6 weeks after the baby shower marked a new chapter in our family's story, her arrival coinciding with our transition to living openly and authentically. The nursery we'd designed during months of secrecy welcomed her with warmth and comfort that reflected our values rather than our budget constraints. Maria's transition to full-time nanny was seamless, her professional expertise combining with genuine affection for Elena to create the kind of supportive environment every new parent hopes for. The family dynamics surrounding Elena's birth were dramatically different from what they might have been if we'd continued our performance of financial struggle. Instead of well-meaning but patronizing advice about managing baby expenses on a tight budget, we received the kind of support and celebration that new parents deserve. Linda's grandmother instincts emerged fully, her joy in her granddaughter uncomplicated by concerns about our ability to provide for Elena's needs. Jessica's relationship with Elena was initially tentative, her embarrassment about the baby shower creating awkwardness that took time to resolve. However, her genuine affection for children and her desire to be a good aunt eventually overcame her discomfort about the changed family dynamics. She began bringing gifts chosen for Elena's enjoyment rather than our presumed budget constraints. Expensive toys and beautiful clothes that reflected her love for her niece rather than charity towards struggling relatives. The foundation work expanded significantly once we stopped trying to hide our involvement and capabilities. Operating openly allowed us to pursue partnerships with major medical institutions that had previously been impossible due to our secrecy requirements. The network of community clinics grew to serve 7 counties, each location designed to meet the specific needs of its community, while maintaining our standards for quality and accessibility. The hiring process for clinic staff became more straightforward once we could be transparent about our resources and long-term commitment to the communities we served. Medical professionals who shared our vision of healthcare as a human right were attracted to positions that offered competitive compensation along with meaningful work. The retention rates at our clinics exceeded industry standards, with staff members expressing satisfaction with both the work environment and the opportunity to make a genuine difference in patients' lives. Elena's first year was marked by the kind of normalcy we'd been seeking since the early days of our marriage. Family gatherings where conversations focused on her development rather than our circumstances. She attended her first foundation board meeting at 3 months old, sleeping peacefully in her carrier while we discussed expansion plans and budget allocations. The board members, many of whom had children and grandchildren of their own, welcomed her presence as a symbol of the future we were building together. The holiday celebrations that year were particularly meaningful, no longer shadowed by the undercurrent of financial judgment that had characterized previous family gatherings. Elena's presence shifted everyone's focus toward shared joy in her development, creating opportunities for genuine connection that had been rare during our years of maintaining facades. Linda's transition from patronizing benefactor to proud grandmother was complete, her delight in Elena's every milestone unburdened by concerns about our ability to provide for her needs. The thrift store maternity dress remained in my closet for months after Elena's birth, not as a reminder of deception, but as a symbol of the complex relationship between appearance and reality. Eventually, I donated it to a local organization that provides professional clothing for women entering the workforce, where it could serve someone who actually needed the kind of help Jessica's friends had thought they were providing. The donation felt like completing a circle, transforming a symbol of performed poverty into genuine assistance for someone facing real financial challenges. The country club where the baby shower was held eventually became one of the venues where we host fundraising events for the foundation. The same rooms where I was once pitied now serving as spaces where we celebrate achievements and plan expansions. The irony wasn't lost on any of us, but it served as a reminder that circumstances can change dramatically when people are willing to live authentically, rather than maintaining facades that serve no one well. Jessica occasionally mentions the baby shower when we're together, usually with embarrassment about her assumptions and the elaborate charity performance she'd orchestrated. We've assured her repeatedly that no lasting harm was done, that her intentions were genuinely kind, and that the experience ultimately forced us to make decisions about honesty and authenticity that needed to be made regardless of the circumstances that prompted them. Her discomfort has faded gradually as she's seen the positive outcomes of our decision to live openly. The lessons Elena will inherit include understanding that identity isn't determined by material possessions or other people's assumptions, that meaningful work requires both privilege and responsibility, and that authenticity is always preferable to performance even when the truth is more complicated than what others want to believe. She's growing up in a world where her parents' choices are aligned with their values, where the work they do matches their public identity, and where family relationships are based on truth rather than carefully maintained fictions. The Foundation's 5-year strategic plan reflects our commitment to sustainable community development rather than temporary charitable interventions. The clinics we've established are designed to become permanent fixtures in their communities, with local hiring practices and community advisory boards that ensure long-term relevance and effectiveness. The scholarship programs have evolved into comprehensive support systems that follow students through medical school and into their professional careers, creating a pipeline of community-focused healthcare providers. Elena's second birthday celebration was held at our real home for the first time, the house we'd been preparing during months of secrecy, finally serving its intended purpose as a center for family life and foundation work. The party included foundation staff, board members, and family members, creating the kind of integrated celebration that had been impossible during our years of compartmentalized living. Linda and Jessica helped with decorations and food preparation, their contributions reflecting genuine enthusiasm rather than charitable duty. The medical journals that had covered our work began following up on the long-term outcomes of our approach to community healthcare, documenting improvements in health indicators and patient satisfaction scores across all our clinic locations. The research validated our belief that combining excellent medical care with genuine respect for patients' dignity and circumstances created better outcomes than traditional charity-based healthcare models. The data supported our arguments for policy changes that would make our approach more widely sustainable. The speaking engagements that followed the journal publications gave us opportunities to share our model with other healthcare providers and policymakers, spreading the impact of our work beyond the communities we serve directly. The presentations emphasized the importance of understanding the populations being served, the value of authentic community engagement, and the effectiveness of treating healthcare as a human right rather than a market commodity. Elena's presence at these events, when appropriate, served as a reminder of the generational perspective that informed our work. We weren't just building healthcare systems for current patients, but creating infrastructure that would serve our daughter and her generation. The long-term thinking that characterized our approach to community development reflected our commitment to sustainable change rather than temporary interventions. The apartment where we'd lived during our months of performed poverty was eventually transformed into transitional housing for medical residents and nursing students working at our clinics. The space that had once symbolized our deception became a resource for young professionals beginning their careers in community healthcare. The transformation felt like redemption, turning a symbol of our complicated relationship with wealth into a practical tool for supporting others. The Bentley still sits in our garage, used primarily for foundation events and meetings, where professional appearance matters for building credibility with potential partners. Most days, we drive more modest vehicles that reflect our continued commitment to living without ostentation, though now that choice comes from genuine preference rather than performance for others' benefit. Elena will grow up understanding the difference between having resources and flaunting them, between using wealth responsibly and hiding from its responsibilities. The community response to our foundation's work has been overwhelmingly positive, with patients and families expressing appreciation for both the quality of care and the dignity with which they're treated. The patient satisfaction surveys consistently rank our clinics among the highest in the region, with particular praise for staff sensitivity to economic concerns and cultural competence. The success metrics validate our approach while providing data to support policy arguments for similar programs. Elena's development during her second year has been marked by the kind of security and stability that comes from parents who are living authentically and working meaningfully. She's surrounded by evidence of purposeful activity rather than material excess, learning from early childhood that work can be both challenging and rewarding when it serves purposes larger than personal advancement. Her babbling often includes attempts at words like clinic and patient, reflecting the environment in which she's growing up. The fundraising events we host have evolved into genuine celebrations of community achievement rather than traditional charity galas. The emphasis is on showcasing the work being done and the outcomes being achieved, rather than highlighting the generosity of donors. The events attract people who are interested in effective community development rather than social recognition, creating a donor base that is committed to long-term sustainability rather than temporary charitable gestures. Looking back, the baby shower that was meant to showcase charity became instead a catalyst for authenticity, forcing us to choose between maintaining comfortable lies and embracing complicated truths. Elena will never know the version of her parents who lived in that modest apartment and accepted patronizing advice about budgeting and resourcefulness. But she'll benefit from the lessons we learned during those months about what matters most in building a meaningful life together. The work continues to grow and evolve, each new clinic and program reflecting lessons we learned during our months of living simply and understanding intimately the communities we serve. The foundation now employs over 200 people across multiple states, all working toward the vision of healthcare as a human right rather than a luxury service. Elena accompanies us to ribbon cuttings and board meetings, learning from toddlerhood that professional obligations can be integrated with family life when the work is meaningful and the values are clear. The transformation from that afternoon at the country club to our current life feels both dramatic and inevitable, the natural outcome of choosing authenticity over performance and meaningful work over social acceptance. Elena represents the future we're building. A world where healthcare is accessible regardless of economic circumstances, where young families don't have to choose between competing necessities, where community support comes without condescension or judgment. She'll grow up knowing that her comfortable life comes with responsibilities to others, that privilege unused is opportunity wasted, and that the best way to honor inherited advantages is to use them in service of people who weren't born with the same advantages. The baby shower revelation that seemed so mortifying at the time has become a story we tell with gratitude for the clarity it provided, the catalyst it created for living more honestly and working more effectively. Elena will inherit not just our resources, but our commitment to using them responsibly, our understanding of community needs, and our belief that authentic relationships are always preferable to comfortable performances. The foundation she'll someday help lead will be stronger, because of the lessons we learned during those months of living between two worlds, understanding both privilege and constraint, abundance and limitation. The third anniversary of that transformative baby shower arrived on a crisp October morning, bringing with it a peculiar kind of nostalgia that I hadn't expected to feel about such a painful memory. Elena, now a spirited 3-year-old with her father's determined chin and my tendency to overthink everything, was helping Maria arrange flowers in the main conference room of our newest clinic, her small hands carefully placing daisies in mason jars while chattering about the big meeting we were hosting that afternoon. The clinic itself stood as a testament to how far we'd traveled from those days of carefully maintained facades and whispered assumptions about our circumstances. Located in the heart of East Los Angeles, the building had been designed specifically to serve a predominantly Latino community that had been underserved by traditional healthcare systems for decades. The architecture reflected both professional excellence and cultural sensitivity, with warm colors and community artwork that made patients feel welcomed rather than judged. Dr. Patricia Williams had flown in from our original location in Riverside for the anniversary celebration, her presence adding weight to what had become an annual tradition of reflecting on our journey and planning for the future. She'd watched our transformation from secretive philanthropists to openly committed community advocates, and her perspective provided valuable continuity as we navigated the ongoing challenges of sustainable healthcare delivery in underserved areas. The morning schedule included a tour for potential donors, representatives from medical schools interested in our residency programs, and policymakers who'd expressed interest in replicating our model in other states. These visitors would see the culmination of everything we'd built since that afternoon, when Maria's arrival at the country club had forced us to choose between continued deception and authentic living. They'd meet patients whose lives had been changed by access to quality healthcare, staff members who'd found meaningful careers serving their own communities, and Elena, who'd grown up understanding that privilege came with responsibility rather than entitlement. The tour groups always asked similar questions about our funding model, our approach to community engagement, and our long-term sustainability plans. These conversations have become opportunities to share the deeper philosophy that guided our work, the understanding that effective healthcare delivery required genuine respect for patients' dignity and circumstances. The visitors rarely heard the full story of our journey to this point, the months of living between two worlds that had informed every decision we'd made about clinic design, staffing, and service delivery. Elena's presence during these tours served multiple purposes. Her natural curiosity and comfort with diverse groups of people demonstrating the kind of cultural competence we hope to instill in all our staff members. She switched effortlessly between English and Spanish depending on her conversation partner, her bilingual abilities reflecting the community-centered approach that characterized all our programs. The visitors often commented on her ease with both wealthy donors and clinic patients, noting how naturally she moved between different social contexts without changing her fundamental friendliness and openness. The lunch gathering that followed the tour brought together foundation board members, clinic staff, community leaders, and family members in the kind of integrated celebration that had been impossible during our years of compartmentalized living. Linda sat next to Elena, helping her navigate the buffet line while discussing the child development programs we'd added to several clinic locations. Jessica worked the room with her characteristic social skills, now directed toward genuine fundraising rather than charitable performance, her networking abilities serving our mission rather than her own social positioning. The conversation naturally turned to the early days of our foundation, the challenges we'd faced in establishing credibility with both medical professionals and community members who'd been disappointed by previous charitable efforts. Dr. Williams shared stories about our initial clinic in the strip mall, the long hours we'd worked to prove that quality healthcare could be delivered affordably and respectfully. The audience listened with appreciation for the journey we'd traveled, understanding that sustainable change required both immediate action and long-term commitment. Elena's contribution to the conversation was characteristically direct and unfiltered, her 3-year-old perspective cutting through adult complexities to focus on essential truths. When someone asked about her favorite part of visiting the clinics, she responded that she liked how the doctors, quote, made people feel better, and how everyone was nice to each other. Her simple observations captured the essence of what we'd tried to create: healthcare environments where healing happened within relationships built on mutual respect and genuine care. The afternoon presentations showcased the data that validated our approach: patient satisfaction scores that consistently ranked among the highest in the region, health outcomes that demonstrated the effectiveness of combining excellent medical care with community engagement, and cost analyses that proved the financial sustainability of our model. The numbers told a story of success that went beyond simple charity to encompass comprehensive community development, healthcare delivery, that addressed root causes rather than just symptoms. The medical students who'd received scholarships through our programs presented their own research, studies that explored the connections between healthcare access, community trust, and long-term health outcomes. Their work reflected the kind of systematic thinking we'd hoped to encourage, approaching healthcare delivery as a complex social challenge, requiring multifaceted solutions rather than simple medical interventions. Several of the students had committed to returning to their home communities after completing their training, carrying forward the community-centered approach they'd learned through our programs. The policymakers in attendance expressed interest in supporting legislation that would make our model more widely replicable, funding mechanisms that could help other communities establish similar programs without relying on private philanthropy. The conversations that followed were encouraging, suggesting that our work might eventually influence healthcare policy at state and federal levels, creating systemic changes that would outlast any individual foundation or clinic. Elena's bedtime routine that evening included her usual request for stories about the old days, her term for the period before her birth, when we'd lived in the apartment and maintained our elaborate performance of financial struggle. She'd developed a fascination with this chapter of our family history, perhaps sensing that it held important lessons about authenticity and courage that she was still too young to fully understand. Her questions were often perceptive, wondering why we'd chosen to let people believe things that weren't true, and whether we'd been sad about not being able to be ourselves. The conversation with Elena that night touched on themes that had become central to our family's identity: the importance of being honest about who we were, while remaining sensitive to others' feelings and circumstances. We'd learned to explain our choices during those months of deception as mistakes made with good intentions, decisions that had created unnecessary complications for everyone involved. Elena listened with the kind of serious attention that made it clear she was processing information that would shape her own understanding of right and wrong. The house that had once served as our secret headquarters now felt like the natural center of our family life, spaces that had been designed for both domestic comfort and professional productivity, serving their intended purposes seamlessly. Elena's artwork covered the refrigerator in the kitchen, where we planned foundation strategy during breakfast, her toys scattered through the offices where we hosted board meetings and donor conversations. The integration of family life and meaningful work had become so natural that visitors often commented on the warmth and authenticity of the environment. Michael's relationship with his family had evolved significantly since those early days of managing their assumptions and expectations about our circumstances. His conversations with Linda and Jessica now focused on Elena's development, foundation achievements, and shared family experiences, rather than concerns about our financial well-being or capacity to provide for our daughter. The relief in his voice when discussing family gatherings was evident, the absence of performance and pretense allowing for genuine connection and mutual support. The Christmas celebration that year was particularly meaningful, our home serving as the gathering place for both sides of the family, along with foundation staff and community partners who'd become chosen family over the years of working together. Elena moved through the crowd with characteristic confidence, equally comfortable with her grandparents and the clinic nurses, foundation board members, and medical students, demonstrating the kind of social ease that came from growing up in an environment where authentic relationships were prioritized over social positioning. The gift exchange reflected the values we'd tried to instill: presents chosen for their meaning rather than their expense, handmade items from clinic patients expressing gratitude for services received, books and toys selected to encourage Elena's curiosity and creativity, rather than impress others with our purchasing power. The contrast with the elaborate charity performance of the baby shower was stark, the genuine warmth and mutual appreciation creating the kind of holiday celebration we'd always wanted but had never quite achieved during our years of maintaining facades. The Foundation's annual report, released in conjunction with the anniversary celebration, documented the scope of what we'd accomplished since that transformative afternoon at the country club. The statistics were impressive, but the stories were more compelling. Patient testimonials about healthcare received with dignity and respect, staff members who'd found meaningful careers serving their own communities, medical students who'd committed to community practice rather than pursuing more lucrative specialties. Elena's contribution to the annual report was a drawing of stick figures holding hands around a building labeled clinic. Her artistic interpretation of what she understood about our work. The image captured something essential about our approach that sophisticated data analysis couldn't convey. The emphasis on human connections and community relationships that made our healthcare delivery model effective. The drawing was reprinted on the cover of the report, her childish artwork serving as a reminder of the values that guided all our professional decisions. The spring brought opportunities to expand our work into new communities, partnerships with other foundations and healthcare organizations that shared our commitment to serving underserved populations. The conversations about expansion were informed by everything we'd learned during our years of operating in communities, where trust had to be earned and maintained through consistent demonstration of respect and competence. Elena often accompanied us to these meetings, her presence serving as a reminder of the generational perspective that informed our long-term planning. The medical conference presentations that followed showcased our model to healthcare professionals from around the country, opportunities to share both our successes and our mistakes with colleagues who were facing similar challenges in their own communities. The presentations emphasized the importance of understanding the populations being served, the value of authentic community engagement, and the effectiveness of treating healthcare as a human right rather than a market commodity. Elena's 4th birthday celebration was held at the original clinic in Riverside, the strip mall location where we'd begun our journey toward authentic community service. The party included patients, staff members, and their families, creating the kind of integrated celebration that had become characteristic of our approach to both professional and personal relationships. The contrast with the elaborate charity performance of the baby shower was complete, genuine warmth and mutual appreciation, creating the kind of community celebration we'd always envisioned but had never quite achieved during our years of maintaining facades. The cake was homemade by one of our nurses, decorated with Elena's favorite cartoon characters, and shared with everyone who'd contributed to creating the community of care that had shaped her early years. The presents were thoughtful rather than expensive, handmade items and carefully chosen books that reflected genuine knowledge of Elena's interests and personality. The celebration embodied everything we'd learned about the difference between authentic generosity and performative charity, relationships built on mutual respect rather than assumed superiority. The evening reflection on Elena's birthday brought Michael and me back to conversations we'd had during those challenging months of living between two worlds. The questions about authenticity and integrity that had ultimately forced us to choose transparency over performance. Elena's presence in our lives had made the choice inevitable, her innocent trust requiring us to model the kind of honesty and consistency we hoped she would embody throughout her own life. The Foundation's work continued to expand and evolve, each new program reflecting lessons learned from our ongoing engagement with the communities we served. The success metrics were encouraging, but the qualitative changes were more meaningful, the development of trust and mutual respect that made sustainable healthcare delivery possible. Elena's growth within this environment provided constant reminders of why the work mattered, her security and confidence reflecting the kind of community support that should be available to all children, regardless of their family's economic circumstances. The anniversary reflection that had begun with that October morning continued throughout the year, each milestone and achievement providing opportunities to consider how far we'd traveled from those days of carefully maintained facades and whispered assumptions. Elena's development served as a measure of our progress, her ability to move comfortably between different social contexts without losing her essential authenticity, demonstrating the kind of cultural competence we hope to instill in all our programs. The work ahead remained challenging. Healthcare policy changes that would require sustained advocacy, community needs that continued to evolve, and the ongoing responsibility of stewarding resources effectively, while maintaining the relationships that made our approach successful. Elena would grow up understanding both the privileges and responsibilities that came with her family's resources, the importance of using advantages in service of others rather than personal advancement. The baby shower that had seemed so mortifying at the time had become a story we told with gratitude for the clarity it had provided, the catalyst it had created for living more honestly and working more effectively. Elena would inherit not just our resources, but our commitment to using them responsibly, our understanding of community needs, and our belief that authentic relationships were always preferable to comfortable performances. The foundation she would someday help lead would be stronger, because of the lessons we'd learned during those months of living between two worlds, understanding both privilege and constraint, abundance and limitation. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.